Alright, so I ended my last video off with some disclaimers regarding this video. I'm gonna repeat some of them and shoot out some more because I really want to make sure that I stress the reason why I'm making this part of my testimony playlist. Regarding this playlist, at the very beginning I mentioned some things that there are some Christians who don't believe it's even possible. I stated that I don't sin anymore. I don't willfully sin. And I'm not sure if I mentioned this part, but I had actually asked Jesus to allow me to be, or make me to be, the best that I could possibly be as a Christian, as a follower of Jesus Christ, according to his will and according to the power that works within me that he's put in me. So I essentially wanted to be the best I could possibly be within myself according to what he is willing to do in me. And there are certain things in the Bible that I've read that I believe and I'm expecting him to do. I mentioned in my testimony, I read 1 John, I think it was 5 to 9, or it could have been 4 to 10, that range. The scripture that I've quoted many times in this channel. When I read that and saw where it said that a Christian, a child of God, does not sin and cannot sin, when I saw that, my response was, I want it. So I asked for it. Today, I can tell you that I have that. Now, there's a lot of people, again, who don't believe, and that's fine. The Bible talks about unbelief. Now, there are other scriptures that talk about making mistakes. And you see that with James. James mentions that a perfect man doesn't stumble in speech. He doesn't stumble in what he says. And Peter also mentioned that those who do these things after listing a bunch of stuff, they'll never fall. And the one who does fall, the one who does sin, they become blinded and they don't see far off and they forgot that they were purged of their old ways. Jude mentions that Jesus is able to keep us from falling. There's also some other scriptures, even in the Psalms, that talks about not allowing our feet to slip and stuff like that. So I asked for this. I said, if it's possible to not make mistakes and not stumble, I want it. Now, I'm not saying this to set a standard for anyone who's watching this video personally. I believe it's Jesus who sets the standard for everyone, and the Bible. So what I had done was I asked Jesus for what I saw in the Bible by faith because I wanted it. As for what Jesus expects of you, again, I'm not the one trying to place that on you. I'm sharing my testimony of what happened with me based on the things that I've asked Jesus. So I really want to make sure that that is clear, that I'm not sitting here trying to tell you that you need to make sure that you don't make any mistakes, and if you make a mistake, it's a sin, because that's not my point. That's not what I'm saying. I'm sharing my testimony to explain what's happened with me so people can know it's even possible. There may be quite a number of you who are watching my video playlist and watching my channel who Jesus has been nudging and saying, hey, listen, I actually want to do this with you. It's very possible. That's also part of the reason why I'm posting this, is so it can be counted as a confirmation to anyone who Jesus is already working with. Now, I said something in my last video that probably sounds like I might be contradicting myself, because I did say that a lot of what I have been learning and doing, Jesus does expect of his bride. Yeah, I did hear that, okay? I did hear that his bride is supposed to be perfect. I did hear that his bride is not supposed to sin. And I also did hear that, to a certain extent, the bride isn't supposed to be making certain mistakes. Now, I want you all to keep in mind, because I do have a playlist called Sin and the Law, and I have a playlist called The New Covenant Israel. These two playlists are going to be covering some very basic concepts that should be helping people with growing. The first set, as I mentioned in the introduction, are supposed to point out problems, and then I have a final set of playlists that are supposed to actually put things together and give answers. So a lot of what I'm saying here, you'll be able to find in those playlists. Now, just because Jesus expects all of us to not sin, and just because Jesus expects us to certain degrees not be making certain mistakes, doesn't mean that the standard that he has for me is the standard that he has for you right now. We all grow differently. So his expectation of me, if I live up to it, then I'm walking in perfection. The expectation he has for you, that he's convicted you of and has showed you, listen, this is how I want you to walk. If you live up to that, then you're perfect in his sight. We may be doing things slightly different, but we're working with what pace and what level and what Jesus has said to us individually. This is why, again, I'm saying that this testimony is not to set a standard for anyone. It's just to share what has happened with me and also open up the door for you to pray and ask Jesus about things going on with you, especially if you've been convicted or if this is confirmation. Because the bride is expected to be without spot and without wrinkle, and that's all according to what Jesus has been saying to you and washing you according to his words. Now, I'm going to go through really quickly what I've been learning about how to not make mistakes, because number one, I'm still working on it. I have not mastered this yet. I would say that I've come quite a long way. I've found that a lot of mistakes are caught before they happen, and I found that I haven't been making as many mistakes as I used to some years ago. But I haven't mastered this, and I still definitely do make mistakes from time to time. I also get attacked a lot that I'm always making mistakes. Satan's on me hard. That's one of the oppressions that I actually get, is that, oh, you're not doing this right. Oh, you're not doing this right. I get a lot of condemnations regarding that. I don't give in to them. I've actually learned how to live above that. Believe it or not, that's actually part of the training. There's a few things that I'm going to be going through here that really should help anyone who is desiring to walk in this particular way, or Jesus has been convicting to walk in this way and they may have been struggling. Or they may think that they're already there and they're not actually there. That's also possible, because I know that can definitely happen to people. So with some of the things that I've been learning about this, the very first thing that I'm going to mention here is that Jesus crushed me to make sure that I was not in fear of making mistakes. Anyone who's in fear of making mistakes, you're not going to be able to be perfect. You're not going to be able to not make mistakes, because you cannot do so while being in fear. Fear is the root of all sin. Every sin pretty much is like the seed of where sins come out of. It starts with fear. So if you have a fear of making mistakes and errors, you're going to be making a lot of them. And the problem with this is you're not going to be able to receive correction properly, which is one of the things that you need to do in order to learn how to not make mistakes. So Jesus put me in a lot of situations where I got used to making mistakes. I got used to failure. I got used to it. And not in the bad way. I got used to it in a good way, meaning I realized, hey, you know what? This is part of learning. Making mistakes is part of learning. And the good way is realizing it's okay to make mistakes. It's good in a lot of cases to make mistakes if you choose to handle it properly. It's good all the time because you can learn from it. And we all make mistakes, except for Jesus. Right? So the point I'm trying to draw out here is I really had to have the right attitude towards mistakes to begin with. I had to really come to terms with, hey, listen, I can mess up. It's possible for me to mess up. It's going to continue to be possible for me to mess up until we're glorified, until I'm glorified and out of here. But while I'm still in this body, the potential and the ability for me to make mistakes is always active. Even if I learn everything perfectly and I start practicing it, the potential is still there. The possibility is still there. It's still doable. Being afraid of this makes no sense because it's counterproductive. So this is one of the first things that Jesus did with me. And if anyone is striving for this, or anyone who's been getting convicted that they need to start working on these kind of things, this is one of the first steps, is realizing, hey, that's okay. If you make a mistake, it's not the end of the world. You don't need to get crushed. You don't need to be broken. You don't need to coil up. You don't need to defend yourself. You don't need to cut people off. Even if people are upset with you over it, it's fine. Anyone who's reacting to you because you made a mistake and they don't want to forgive you and they want to be mad at you and stuff, that's actually their problem. If you come back to them and say, oh, I'm sorry that I hurt you or I did this or that, and you try to do the uttermost to try and fix things and they don't want to let it go, that's now their problem. That's between them and Jesus. I'm not saying don't pray for them. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do anything else. All I'm saying is it's not something that you need to internalize and take it upon yourself to now bust yourself trying to get this person to forgive you. That's not your job. Okay? Your job is just to make sure that you go back, reconcile, let them know it was a mistake. Let them know, hey, listen, like, I didn't mean it this way. It wasn't supposed to be this. This is what I meant. Can we be at peace? And their job is to forgive you and say, okay. And if they don't want to do that, that's now between them and Jesus, and you're probably going to need to pray for them because they're in trouble. The next thing that I learned about not making mistakes is pretty much the practical instruction that Jesus gave me. And I learned this a long time ago, guys. I actually learned how to not make mistakes. I don't remember the year, but it was a long time ago. It was before I gave up work and everything. It was actually at work. I think it may have been in 2014. So this is before I even was even fully walking in perfection. Jesus had already started working on me on not making mistakes in certain things. You see? He gave me a standard of not making mistakes in certain things. There's other areas, okay, if I made mistakes, whatever. But one thing I was making a mistake in was in my speech. I was oftentimes speaking about things I should not have been speaking about, accidentally gossiping. There was times where... I remember the last time I lied, actually. I was at work. A manager asked me a question, and I fully lied. I was in complete shock. Like, I couldn't believe I gave a lying answer. And the reason why was because I had a very sharp fear hit me, and then I gave the wrong answer. I lied, and he left, and then I felt absolutely devastated. I was like, what? Why did I say that? And then Jesus showed me that I fell into fear, and I quickly answered. And it was actually a mistake. That's not me. You know, when it comes to telling the truth, I'm gonna just tell the truth. I don't really care what happens to me. If people are upset with me, or if you know, if there's consequences of telling the truth, then okay, I'm gonna tell the truth. In that instance, that was really trippy. I remember that day, and I asked Jesus about this, and on top of other mistakes I was making as well, in accidentally gossiping and saying things, and things were just coming out of my mouth. And Jesus explained to me that I was not following him. That was one of the main factors. So I started trying to follow him beforehand when it came to this speech thing, and it just failed. I was always saying things too quickly, and then I would get the convictions afterwards, or I'd realize afterwards, and I'd feel like so bad. And I had to come to a place where I just said to Jesus, like, listen, I can't do this. I really need you to help me in slowing me down. I'm thankful for the convictions that you're giving me, but I get them afterwards. I need to get the conviction beforehand so I can then not do this, like, so I can not make the mistake. So Jesus honored that prayer. I started somehow getting the conviction before I would say what it was, and I'd still do it. Like, it wasn't an instant change. I'd get the conviction and then blah, blah, blah. And praise God, this time around, because the conviction came ahead of time, I didn't condemn myself. I didn't get all upset. Usually, that is what would have happened. I would have been like, oh man, I messed up. This time around, I was like, okay, this is progress. I actually noticed the conviction before I said it. So now I just needed to work on yielding to the conviction. So I continued praying and asking Jesus to help me with that. And Jesus eventually helped me slow down. And when the conviction came, I'd kind of stop, and then I'd have time to think. And that's really the main instruction regarding this. It's really slowing down, being patient, and following Jesus' leading. That's what Jesus showed me. If you want to learn how to stop making mistakes, we just have to yield to Jesus. We have to learn to slow down and yield to the convictions of the Holy Spirit, and he will lead us. Throughout these videos, I'm pretty sure you may have noticed that there's times where I start speaking really quickly. And I notice that even in making these videos, if I get really excited and passionate about the subject, I start speaking a lot faster, and I make mistakes. I'll make mistakes in speech, and I'll stutter more. And I also notice that if I slow down, I make a lot less mistakes, and there's a lot less stuttering. That's really it. I mean, if you really want to learn how to stop making mistakes, especially starting off with certain mistakes, it just comes down to slowing down, being patient, following Jesus' leading. Jesus explained to me that when we slow down, we give room to make judgment about matters put before us. If we are too quick and hasty, we won't have a lot of room to judge, and that's where we can make mistakes. So slowing down gives us time to really think about what's being said, what's being done, what's going on around us, and it gives us time to acknowledge Jesus. It gives us time to receive wisdom. It gives us time to understand the best way to react. And in doing so, we get the proper judgment. Then we can go with the right way of handling things. That is the secret to not making mistakes. That's how simple it is. Jesus explained that this is what he did while he walked on the earth. He was just patient and he followed the Father. And he did everything right. He just followed the Father. Jesus was insulting people. Okay, he called the Pharisees brood of vipers. He called them fools. He insulted them by saying something, and then I think the lawyers or whoever said, "Listen, don't you realize you insulted the Pharisees?" And he didn't even apologize. He said, "Leave them; they're blind guides." He said that every tree that's not planted by his Father will be uprooted and tossed into the fire. Leave them; they're blind guides, and if the blind follow the blind, both will fall into the ditch. So just because we may insult people with the truth doesn't necessarily mean that we've made a mistake. Now, on the contrary, we could speak to people like that, and that may not be what Jesus wants us to do, and we can't justify ourselves just because Jesus said it then to the Pharisees. That may not be what people need to hear today. So that's where the really slowing down and being diligent in understanding what Jesus wants us to say becomes very important, at the same time of not allowing oneself to fall into self-condemnations or getting attacked by the enemy by saying, "Oh, well, this person reacted this way, so you made a mistake. This is wrong, blah, 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 blah." Because we're not judging our mistakes based on how people react. We're judging mistakes, we're judging error based on what Jesus says to us. Now, something that is useful regarding people's reactions is if you do get a really bad reaction from someone, that is usually a good time to go back to Jesus and just double check to make sure that you are in the clear. That's just a word of advice. It's something that I generally live by. If someone's reaction isn't good, just in case, go back and double check, because you don't want to be sitting there in pride and being confident in what you've shared. Meanwhile, it's possible you may have said something off, or not necessarily in the best way. So that is the really, really big instruction. Slowing down, being quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger, leave room for judgment, slow down so you can assess and judge, hear from Jesus, acknowledge him, and have him direct your path. If you're in a hasty situation where you need to move quickly, Jesus can still lead you and guide you, and you can be bang on and still maneuver quickly. But in most cases, you're going to have time. You have time to make judgment. You can pray and ask Jesus to help you with it. The very last important thing I'm going to mention about not making mistakes, this is super important because this is part of the reason why I even have this channel up. It's a correction to a lot of children of God regarding an attitude and regarding conduct, because if this thing is not applied, it ruins everything. It crushes everything. In fact, it has the power to turn you into an antichrist. In order to not make mistakes, to learn how to not make mistakes, we have to love correction. There's a lot of people who are in fear of making mistakes, and then they become afraid of receiving correction, and they just hold on to their information saying, "Okay, I'm right." Jesus told me straight that that is not the way. If you want to be perfect, and if you want to learn to stop making mistakes and make sure that you don't make mistakes, you have to love correction and be willing to receive correction. And when I say receive correction, I'm talking about receive the information that's presented to you and go to Jesus and break it down and actually assess it, entertain it. Take it to pieces and see if it lines up with you and assess it. I'm not saying instantly yield and just do whatever the correction is that someone sends you, whether it's a person or whatever. I'm saying receive it as in bring it to Jesus to shine the light, break it down, and find out what the truth is regarding the information presented to you, the correction presented to you, and what you're doing and what you're supposed to do. The reason why this is so important is because if we do neglect this, what can happen is we can develop the mindset that I'm perfect in this area, I have no need of work, and then it crystallizes us and locks us in this mindset. And if we actually do have a mistake in there, how are we going to be able to receive the correction if we already believe it's perfect? So what I'm getting at here is, in learning how to not make mistakes, we have to always be open to double check to see if we have a mistake. So what I explained here was 3 things. 1, Jesus allowed me to be in situations that had crushed me, and it wasn't like overly bad, but some of them were a little bit humiliating, some of them were humbling, but he put me through situations where I learned how to not fear making mistakes. I was able to look at mistakes as a stepping stone, as a tool that helps me, and it literally opens up the door to have a reason to love correction and receive truth. He showed me not to shield myself from mistakes and guarding myself from mistakes in this manner, but to actually embrace the idea, hey, listen, this can happen. I don't need to protect myself. I just need to trust Jesus to correct me. The second thing is that Jesus showed me how to not make mistakes, which is really just to slow down, be patient, and follow his leading. And there was a lot of processing in that, by the way. I did get hit up with false Christs. I would be patient and wait. Sometimes I wouldn't get any answers. And I would literally have to just walk moving forward, trusting Jesus to, at some point, guide. And if I made the mistake at that point, this isn't even an issue with me. Because the entire time I'm trying my best to follow Jesus. And if something goes wrong, the reason why it went wrong is because the enemy stepped in pretending to be Jesus and trying to mess around. And Jesus would always lead me onto the right track. And Jesus never called those mistakes. Why? Because my eye was focusing on him the whole time, trying to make sure and trying to check. He would never charge that as, oh, you sinned or you made a mistake or it's an error. He never charged it that way. So we just really need to follow Jesus. Wherever we need help, just pray and ask him to help. The key is to slow down, leave room for judgment, so that we can react in the best way. I'm going to make one last point on that reaction thing at the very end. The last point that I just brought up as well was to love correction. In loving correction, it leaves us open to double check ourselves to make sure there's no mistakes that crept in. This is a very, very big deal. In this video, I'm just focusing on the subject of learning to not make mistakes. In other videos, this is a big issue. If people are not loving correction and not going back and double checking things, it can literally send people to hell. People could be believing the wrong thing and refusing correction that Jesus is sending in various ways because they think they're right. The last little tidbit that I'm going to mention that I just said I was going to mention was that the whole reaction thing, I'm going to state something about perfection that a messenger told me in a dream. When I woke up, I was like, what? I had a religious mindset kind of just attack me there in thinking about rejecting it. But when I really thought about what this messenger said, it made perfect sense. You see, I talk a lot about perfection. I talk a lot about ceasing from sin. However, this messenger actually gave me a definition of perfection that had absolutely nothing to do with ceasing from sin. In fact, the messenger told me that being perfect has little to do with being righteous. Now you can imagine why that threw me off. I was like, what are you talking about? The messenger said it wasn't about righteousness. The messenger said that being perfect is reacting the right way. And I knew what it meant by this. That statement can really easily throw people off and maybe even cause people to stumble, so I'm going to explain what was meant. Focusing on not sinning and being righteous does not equal perfection. Perfection is a much broader spectrum. And what's cool is what that messenger said to me, if anyone focuses on that, they will be perfect, even in righteousness. Because perfection is learning how to react to each situation the right way, the Jesus way. So temptation is included in that. We sin because of temptation. So if we react to temptation the right way, we're not going to sin. But here's the other thing. If someone comes to us and says A, B, and C, we can respond to them, but it may not be sin the way that we responded, but it may not have been the best way. And perfection is the best way. Perfection is not just simply ceasing from sin. It's not ceasing from sin is baby food, actually. Not making mistakes, if we react the right way, we won't make a mistake. So anyone who desires to actually be perfect as they can be in Jesus, as perfect as Jesus has outlined for them, because I'm not setting that standard for you, that's Jesus who sets that standard. I'm not talking about just sin here, because we're all expected to not sin. I'm talking about whatever else Jesus is putting before you. Anyone who desires to be perfect, anyone who desires to not make mistakes and so on, and anything else, really just ask Jesus to teach you how to react, to slow you down so you can judge this situation and react appropriately. It's the same instruction about not making mistakes. If we could slow down and assess the situation, if we could slow down and follow Jesus' leading and his judgment in the situation, that'll minimize the mistakes. And for many people who practice this kind of lifestyle will cause you to stop making mistakes. So this is the last video I'm going to make concerning my testimony and things that I learned. There are a lot of other things that I learned, but this is just enough now just to encourage people to seek Jesus on these matters. And my next video in this playlist is just going to be a conclusion video. It's going to explain some aspects of my testimony. There's going to be 2 other testimony videos that are not going to be part of this playlist. Because of the nature of what these testimonies are like, I'm going to put them in a separate playlist on this channel. I'm going to talk a little bit about that and end this playlist with that video.